Hello and welcome to On Parliamentary Language, a political podcast that whenever we play Deal or No Deal, chooses No Deal. And how are you today, Rob?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm enjoying the speediness of my computer now. I've upgraded it to have an SSD, which hopefully will make editing and recording just a bit easier.
Excellent. I am currently enjoying the football, and I have been for the past 2 weeks. There was one day on Friday where there was no football, and I didn't know what to do with myself. So I'm trying to build myself up to a time where there will be no football, and I have too much time on my hands.
I mean, I'm sure you'll find something else like the cricket to watch for days on end. So
There's tennis and there's cricket. There's actually, you're right. There's loads of sport. I'll be able to fill my summer up with something.
I was going to say, it's got to the point where, because I live near Wimbledon, if I ask Google to tell me when the next train to Wimbledon is, it actually tells me how to get to Wimbledon tennis courts, which is not as helpful because they're about 50 minutes away. Wimbledon station is about 20 minutes away.
That's still cool to live so close. I'm very jealous.
Yeah, if only I had tickets.
Yeah.
Shall we move straight on into Headline Quickfire? So our first headline from the Times, Airbus prepares to take flight.
This is the story that Airbus, which is basically a plane maker, said that it might leave the UK and relocate in Europe if there's a no deal that happens as a part of the EU negotiations. Currently, Airbus employs about 14,000 people in the UK, so it would be a big loss for the government in terms of jobs, and it would be quite embarrassing, really, if they lost. And this was what the Remain campaign was arguing would happen as a result of the EU, as a result of Brexit, that we'd lose quite a few businesses. And this is one of the biggest and most vocal ones that have come out, basically threatening to leave if the government doesn't get a move on and sorts out a deal between Britain and the EU.
Our next story also kind of ties into that a bit. It's over the pond, similar issue. Trump's tariffs drive Harley to build EU bikes outside US, from the Financial Times.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but Trump has decided to put tariffs on goods coming into the US. And as a result of that, the EU has basically done retaliatory tariffs on US goods, such as Harley-Davidson's. And Harley has now said that it would move some of its business outside the US to the EU, so it doesn't affect its market, so it can still sell Harleys in the EU at a cheaper price. Donald Trump has not been happy about this decision from Harley-Davidson, basically saying it's a betrayal. He said everybody who ever bought a Harley-Davidson voted for Trump, and they are very unhappy about it. He said that to Fox News. It's an American symbol as well. I think when you think American bike, you think Harley-Davidson. So again, it embarrasses Trump a little by having this sort of icon saying, as a result of your policies, we're going to have to move to the EU. It's one of many companies. We'll have to see if any others follow suit, but it certainly shows that there are consequences to Trump's trade war.
So our next headline, we've got two here. One from the Times, which is sums it up quite succinctly. MPs back 14 billion Heathrow expansion. That's 14 billion pounds. And then a slightly funnier headline for the same one from the Metro. BoJo's no-show for Heathrow, which is fun to say.
Yeah, exactly. I picked that one precisely because it's good to say.
There's an episode title right there.
Yeah. This is the decision by MPs to approve the Heathrow Airport expansion. This is a decision that's been rumbling on in British politics for years and years and years. Under the Cameron government, this was discussed. MPs have fought by-elections on the issue and won and lost. I think just before the general election last year, it was Zach Goldsmith. Goldsmith, the
mayoral candidate, but who didn't
mayoral candidate for the Conservatives. Yeah, he fought, I think, in Richmond upon Thames.
Yeah, he gave up his position as an MP in Richmond upon Thames, which gave was it Sarah Olney, the Lib Dem MP, the opportunity to take over because basically he completely ruined his reputation by being very, very conservative up against Sadiq Khan. And then I think basically Richmond said, we're not having another Tory for a bit.
Yeah, and essentially, but the whole reason that by-election happened was because the Conservatives said they were going to go ahead with this vote. And Zach Goldsmith said, I promised my constituents I wouldn't support this, so I'm going to run as an independent. And it sort of triggered a by-election. And so it's something that's gone on a lot. Boris Johnson has been very vocal. I think when he got elected last year, he said that he would lay down in front of the bulldozers before he allowed the Heathrow expansion to go ahead. And as the Metro headline suggests, when it happened, he didn't even turn up to the vote because his excuse was that he was in Afghanistan as foreign secretary, so he couldn't attend. But a lot of people thought that it was, quite fortunate timing for Boris that he didn't have to be there to vote against the government and possibly lose his cabinet position. So they've now approved the airport expansion. I know I keep coming back to this, but it's the issue that's driving everything. People seem to think that the reason this has finally been approved by the government is Brexit. If we want to do more trade with the outside world, we need airport expansion to be able to have some capacity for that trade. So it's sort of sped up that process to make sure that the Heathrow does get expanded rather than the can being sort of kicked down the road as it had been for the past 5 to 6 years.
So there's a very good video on YouTube that I'll make sure to put in the show notes that discusses the expansion plans. Basically, the summary of that video is people have been saying, we should expand Gatwick, we should expand Heathrow. But realistically, if all you care about is number of planes coming through the UK and fixing that, we need to expand both. And it's taken like 6 years to approve backing Heathrow when both of them needed to have been approved like 15 years ago to deal with the increase in traffic. And obviously that's only if you care about throughput, which obviously with Brexit, it seems like we want that now. If we'd stayed in the EU, maybe you could have made the argument that actually we don't need to expand. Other places in Europe will take more of the transit. So, for example, Schiphol Airport, isn't it? Amsterdam Schiphol,
yeah, Amsterdam. Yeah? I've been to that airport and it's massive.
Amazing. It's got so Heathrow has 2 runways and Gatwick has 1, and I believe Schiphol has 3 or 4. Anyway, it's all in this video. It's very interesting how, but basically, I think it's been obvious to most people who don't live under the flight path that we needed to do this for some time. But obviously, people who've lived for 20 years who suddenly have to have planes flying over their house are going to be annoyed that there are planes flying over their house. Yeah,
and it's something that's divided people. I know that the Labour were officially against the expansion, but they allowed a free vote on this one. So about 119 Labour MPs supported it. I believe John McDonnell said that he said, there are human costs of this decision that this House needs to recognise and contemplate before the vote tonight, to worry and blight my community once again on a programme that will never, pardon the pun, take off.
I mean, I love a good pun, but I should be reading more of the Hansard, clearly. On to our next story tonight from the Daily Mirror. I mean, this has been covered in a lot of papers, but I think this was the best headline. Just all caps, firefight, more blaze hell. This has been all over my Facebook because a lot of my friends live in Manchester from my university days and around Salford. So they have seen the blaze in the distance. Would you like to fill us in on that?
Well, yeah, you probably know more than me, but we've been in the middle of a heat wave, haven't we, in the UK? And
very much so. I'm very warm, and I was expecting it might be a storm tonight, but Google tells me it's 28 degrees tomorrow. That's not okay.
No, it was meant to have ended by now. And I think the storm's meant to hit us, so apologies if you hear any of that recording later. But essentially the hot weather has turned the moors up near Manchester into a tinderbox, and it's now ignited, and they're covering miles out there. I think today the news was that the 2 big fires had merged, and they've had to call the army in, and the smoke cloud is forcing people out of their homes. It's quite a natural disaster that's brought on that we seem relatively powerless to stop, or you've just got to let it burn, I suppose. But what do you know?
Well, I mean, so I don't know much about the firefighting aspect itself. I assume all they can really do is try and contain it, so make the ground where they think it's going to go very wet, as opposed to trying to put it out directly and just hope it burns itself out. As I say, a lot of photos. There's a very good video, I think, on the BBC website that is a time lapse of basically the entire skyline in flames, and it's shocking. Like we were discussing this. This isn't the kind of thing that tends to happen in Britain, especially not in the north. The north around Manchester, quite a lot of rainfall. This tends to be the kind of thing that would happen in France or Italy, where they tend to be drier during the summer months. So the fact that it's happening in the UK shows that we're kind of maybe not we're not in an actual drought, but like it's rare for this kind of thing to happen. So yeah, it's obviously terrible for the people who live nearby. The smoke, I think, has made it all the way into Salford. That can't be nice for anyone who's having to deal with it. But yeah, it's a natural thing that's happening. I think it's essentially under control, and these firefighters are working tirelessly to deal with it. But it's made the news because this kind of thing doesn't tend to happen in the UK. And speaking of things that don't tend to happen, our next headline from the Daily Telegraph sports section: a historic humiliation.
The Germans are out.
Yeah, I mean,
the Germans are out
for the first time since 1938, I believe. And I don't really follow football, but I've heard that bandied around, so you can confirm.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. So there's a famous saying in football. Gary Lineker used to say it all the time. Football is a simple game. 11 men play 11 men, and at the end of the day, the Germans win. Just how it was. But they lost. I don't know what happened at this tournament. Germany were one of the favourites coming in. They'd won the World Cup back in 2014. There has, however, been this curse of the winner. So I think since France won it in 1998, every subsequent winner has gone out in the group stages.
Yes.
But nobody expected it to happen to Germany because they're Germany, and psychologically, they're usually so strong, so composed. They got out of jail with a win over Sweden in their second game with a goal in 95th minute of injury time. So you thought, oh, okay, there was a bit of a scare, but they're bound to beat South Korea, who were frankly already out of the group. It was meant to be a walkover. And Germany just didn't turn up. The second goal in particular, I don't know if you saw it, but where the...
No, I had it fed. I had the information fed to me while something else was happening. But just because it was kind of crazy. Well, we're in a joint Facebook message, as you know, and it all appeared in there. So I got the details, but I didn't actually watch the match itself.
Yeah, their goalkeeper basically went for a run up the pitch and was over the halfway line, lost the ball. Yeah. And there was a tremendous picture in the Times of just a South Korean player scoring in an empty net and just saying, where are the Germans? So, the only thing I'll leave you with is that the last time Germany went out of a World Cup before England was in 1966. So, in short, England are guaranteed to win the World Cup.
I mean, that's definitely what the papers are saying.
Yes.
Though I won't wait with bated breath, really. I think another cool thing about the story was the fact that because South Korea, as you say, they definitely weren't the favourites to win. And then this means that Mexico got through. There were some great stories of like these people just walking around, and a load of Mexican fans got to them like, "Are you Korean?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they just like pick them up like a crowd and like shake them around like, "Yeah, you're the best." But just random people, not even the actual footballers, which is amazing. Like Mexico's just so happy to have got through. So there's, I suppose that's our fluffy puppy update for this week. Kind of a fun, interesting story. I mean, sad for the Germans. I have a few German colleagues, so they're a bit sad about it. But I think everyone else is happy. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
So now our next headline, also from the Daily Telegraph: CO2 crisis hits meat supplies. And also in the Daily Mail, now your fizzy drinks rationed.
Yeah, this is the story that I think essentially due to demand, because there's a World Cup on, as I might have mentioned, and lots of people want lots of beer that's fizzy. It's very warm weather, so people also want a lot of fizzy drinks and stuff. This has led to a massive surge in demand, which the CO2 producers can't keep up with. I think that's right, unless you've heard.
That's about all I'm aware of with this. Yeah. It kind of came up. I drink ale as a general rule, or cocktails, which don't need that much in the way of CO2, so it's not really affected me. But I think people who drink a lot of lager or fizzy drinks are slightly worried.
Yeah, and so across Europe, I think all the major CO2 producers in France, Germany, and Belgium are shut. They've got 3 shut in the UK. There's only 2 open here. And it means that it's affecting a lot of supermarkets that are having to ration fizzy drinks. I know Asda have brought that in now. CO2 is also, and I didn't know this, it's used to stun animals. And also when you get meat under a bit of polythene, whatever it is, they've got CO2 in there to help preserve it and keep it fresh.
Yeah, it's normally CO2 mixed with nitrogen to make the antiseptic environment and keep it red. That's the big thing because 20, 30 years ago, when you'd buy meat, it can be fresh and it would be maybe even grey, or like if you go to a butcher's. But if it's packaged, people tend to expect it to look red, even though that doesn't necessarily mean it's any fresher.
Yeah. So yeah, it's led to, like we said, shortages of fizzy drink and meat. It kind of ties in. This is only sort of like word of mouth I've heard, but have you heard that there's a halloumi shortage as well at the moment?
Yes, I've also heard that. That one seemed less of a problem. That reminded me of the Great Biscuit shortage about 2 or 3 years ago, which I didn't notice at all, despite everyone saying there was a biscuit shortage. I was never short on biscuits. Admittedly, I'm not a daily eater of biscuits, but yeah, I felt like it's one of those things where I feel like it's probably blown up more by the papers, whereas this CO2 thing has been going on for a bit longer. I think it might actually be an actual problem.
Yeah, it's gone on for a couple of weeks now, hasn't it? And this seems to be demand might go down when the World Cup's gone, is not on. But I think it'll take a while for them to get back going. And I'd be interested to see what happens. We've clearly never had like rationing in our lifetimes or anything like that, so it's weird to see the effects of there being too much demand for something and then you having to change your habits. So
yeah, I think the only thing that's ever been banned briefly in my lifetime has been a few hosepipe bans and very hot summers to ensure there's enough water. But I don't have a garden now, so it's not really a problem. And our final headline tonight, which I think will probably just lead straight onto into our main story. No chance of Brexit deal by October, says Brussels in The Independent. I think we don't really need to discuss that particularly. I mean, I think that's fairly self-explanatory, but I think that leads us on quite nicely into the concept of what no deal means. People have said no deal a lot. We've mentioned it on this podcast. What is no deal? What does that mean? I mean, it's very clear that no deal means not having a deal, but what would be the negative effects of that? Because some people are saying, we'll just be fine. We'll go back to old rules that are in place. And then other people are like, no, we can't possibly go to WTO rules. They're awful. They'll ruin the country, bankrupt us. So let's start with a bit of a timeline and then maybe discuss what could happen from now if we ended up with no deal.
Yeah, cool. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of Brexit, where we are in the process, essentially how much time we've got left. So very quickly, June 23rd, 2016 was the result itself. Then it took about 3/4 of a year to March 29th, 2017 to trigger Article 50, which was the big news that essentially we had 2 years and then we'd have to leave the EU. There was a bit of a delay between March and June because Theresa May decided to call a general election, which meant that negotiations had to be put on pause because the EU couldn't negotiate with somebody and then have the party change halfway through. If they were negotiating with the Conservatives and then suddenly Labour won the election, then maybe their whole system would change. So we wasted a little bit of time there. But the negotiations finally began on June 26th of 2017. In March earlier this year, we finally got a deal out of the EU, or at least the beginnings of the deal. So what we've agreed so far is that there's going to be if we decide to leave, there's going to be a transitional period, which means that we've got a couple of years, probably into the 2020s, where we can keep some EU laws, or there'll be some sort of Passover time in between us leaving completely. There won't be sort of a sharp cut. They also agreed that EU citizens in the UK can stay. They agreed policies on fishing. We agreed that there's a divorce bill, so we'd have to pay the EU up to 39 billion as a result of leaving. But there's also some big things that have been left undecided, which we've discussed on this podcast, like the Northern Irish border and getting a trade agreement, getting any customs union through. The major piece of news that's happened that's caused this story to happen with the no chance of a Brexit deal by October is that we had this big summit last week on June the 28th, which was held, that we had hopes that we would start to resolve some of the main issues that have come up. So the remaining issue of Northern Ireland and the customs union, we needed to sort out. However, nothing has come out of that process. Northern Ireland, as it remains, is how Northern Ireland is integrated into the EU, if there's going to be a trade barrier, if it's going to be a hard border, all of that kind of stuff is still up in the air, and it's left the EU frustrated and essentially said that we're running out of time to do a deal, and there's a real risk of a no deal Brexit.
So there's a real, as you say, there's a real chance of having a no deal.
Yeah.
I suppose the point of this segment, what does that mean? I mean, the terminology is clear. It means we haven't agreed on something. But as you say, we've got some agreements like EU citizens in the UK can say. So presumably those things are fixed now. We've discussed those. So no deal still means certain things have been agreed. So it's not entirely no deal. So I'm assuming that no deal here means that we don't have a total complete answer. But there are some things we've managed to agree that presumably would happen anyway. Is that correct?
Well, no, it's not.
Okay.
If we can't agree everything on the piece of paper, there is no deal. If we can't sort out Northern Ireland, then all the negotiations that have gone before don't matter.
Right. Okay. So it is a complete. It's if we get to an impasse and then we can't continue. So everything we've agreed up to this point, even though that might be a good idea, just falls by the wayside.
Yeah, it's a checklist. If you're going to sign a contract with somebody, you've got to be happy with all parts of the contract. And usually where negotiation comes down is I'm happy with 95%, but this 5% needs to change. So, however, we won't, like, all the signatories won't agree it until everything is decided. So it's good that we've made some steps down the line, but if you think that it's been 2 years since we had the result, at least, and it's been over a year since we triggered Article 50, and we've had a bit of time sort of faffing about with that, or at least making some progress, but being unable to decide on big issues. And these are Northern Ireland and the Customs Union should probably be the first big issues on your list to solve. They're not easy ones to sort. So we've sort of done our easy ones first, and left the hardest ones to last. And one point of warning I wanted to point out here is that if Article 50 was triggered March 29th, 2017, you may think that we've still got till March 28th, 2017 to negotiate with Brussels.
2019.
2019 to negotiate with Brussels. However, the EU are really keen to get everything sorted by December. So we've got less than 5 months, basically, to agree on a new customs union around Northern Ireland with the EU. And the reason for that is that the EU thinks it will take about 3 months for the agreed deal to go through Parliament. We've already talked last episode about how long it took the EU withdrawal bill. That was a bill that was entirely designed within the UK to pass through Parliament. If you want to do the same, but with something from an outside, like here's the treaty with the EU, do you agree, yes or no? That still takes a lot of time to get through Parliament, particularly with the majority that Theresa May has, and the potential splits in her party over what might happen with the deal. So that's why things are getting tense, and that's why the EU's come out and said, we really need to sort this out now, guys. The next meeting is in October the 18th to the 19th, and that's seen as like the most likely opportunity for a final agreement on the UK divorce, and the last chance. So October's the big deadline. December 13th and 14th is the last European Council of 2018, and it's seen as the last sort of practical date for the EU to get together and sign off on it to get it through. So I've always talked about that ticking clock, and those are the key dates to look out for when you're thinking about how close the how close the EU deal is, and considering what the government's been able to achieve so far. I'm a little worried that we'll come to those dates, or at least that when we get there, things might not all be in place for us to put a good deal to the EU.
So obviously, I suppose that leaves us 3 options, right? So first option is we press on with the negotiations, we do really well, better than we've been doing, and we come to an agreement in time for that timeline you've put forwards. And it's a deal we think is good and that the EU likes. That is our preferred option out of the 3 Brexit options, I would assume, because everyone gets what they want. I mean, obviously, there's compromise in all these deals, but I mean, like, if both sides agree, that's probably the best thing that can come from this. Is no, politically, it looks good for the government, and politically, it's good for our relations with the EU that we've agreed on something that they like. Then I suppose our second level then is we get to near that date and we basically have to make some concessions that we don't want to in order to appease the EU.
Yeah, and that runs the risk of it not passing through Parliament in the 3 months if we've made concessions that either upset the hard Brexiteers or the soft Brexiteers too much, depending on which way the government goes in negotiation.
Yeah, but I mean, let's assume it goes through there. Like, that means we've got we've got what we would consider a bad deal, but depending on what level that is, it could be pretty close to our perfect compromise that we're hoping for. And then, as you say, the final option is no deal. So what happens March 28th, was it? 2019?
Yeah, March 28th.
March 28th, 2019, we haven't got a deal. What happens?
So a couple of things, and they might sound a little scary, but it is scary with the no deal option. So first of all, you've got legal chaos because all the law that we've had with the EU goes out of date, and there'll be nothing there immediately to replace it.
But is that not the point of our Great Repeal Bill, that gives the government power to basically keep all that law in place?
Yeah, yes, but the EU law is so expansive and has been part of our constitution. When we talk about what makes up law in the UK, a lot of EU law was sort of absorbed into UK law to make up a lot of our rules. That's why things go to the Court of Human Rights. That's why things are challenged there. If that all suddenly goes out of date in one day, that's thousands and thousands of statutes that may not have had the time to be scrutinized in depth, to be decided to decide if we want to keep those or if we don't. And essentially it will cause a lot of confusion because a no deal means no transition period. So it's just you turn the switch, suddenly there's no EU backdrop. So that's why there would be legal chaos in my opinion. Right.
Okay.
Secondly, so we've got trade, and we've talked about trade going to the World Trade Organization rules. So there is a backstop. Trade wouldn't just stop, so it doesn't sound so bad, but all goods would now be subject to customs checks. Wherever they come in from the world, they'd be subject to customs checks, which essentially would lead to big lorry queues at Calais, Dover, etc., as we try and get goods in. So trade would grind to a halt and come to a stop.
I've seen Operation Stack going on the M20, and I imagine it would just be that, but worse.
Yes.
And that doesn't look fun for the lorry drivers, and often isn't fun for the car drivers trying to get past. So yeah, no, I can imagine that would be very problematic.
Yeah. And it like you say, it looks bad, doesn't it? Operation Stack just looks bad for people in the area and looks bad for the country as a whole. So not a great PR victory in that sense. The next one is, so we've talked about Northern Ireland a lot. The only option would be a hard border between Northern Ireland and the EU. It would have to be, because we haven't come to a deal with the EU. There can be no freedom of movement. There can be no freedom of trade. It's got to be a fence or a hard border or nothing at all, which would be, we've already spoken in previous episodes about why that would be contentious. It would be very problematic between people who live on both sides of the border. And again, you've got no transition period. It would just be a switch flipped, and that would have to be the case.
And presumably the problem there as well, I mean, I know we've touched on this, is, it's not like the building of the Berlin Wall. What happens that night? We can't put up a fence covering that whole border that evening. So it would be a hard border, possibly in name only as well, which makes for problems. I'm sure people could make a lot of money out of getting stuff across the border that night.
Yeah, you'd have a big gaping hole in the tariff wall, essentially, which would cause chaos in another sense. Yeah, so there's that. Also, you've got food prices would go up, so it would be a short-term consequence is likely that the value of the pound would plummet. So food might temporarily be a little cheaper, at least from within the UK. But as tariffs are applied on imported goods, it's likely that a lot of food would have higher tariffs than they currently are under the EU. So food prices will go up, and that would start to affect people's living costs. The only food that might be exempt is fish, because we'd be out of the EU fisheries policy. The UK could fish all we want, but we wouldn't be able to sell it to the largest market we currently sell our limited fishing stocks to, which is the EU. So maybe those two sort of work hand in hand. Food prices go up, but there might be a lot of cheap fish around.
The nation will survive on fish and chips.
Yes.
We've got potatoes in Northern Ireland, they're fine. We've got fish, that's fine. We can do this. It's a complete meal. You don't need anything more than batter, fish and chips.
Yes.
And some tartar sauce.
Yeah, the fish and chips contingency, I believe that's called in Whitewood. So, yeah. What else you've got? I think I might have mentioned in passing that planes would stop flying. So the reason for that is that that simply you would lose your right to fly to other countries. The only way you could get to other countries would be through the national airline that's set up. So, for example, if you wanted to fly Ryanair, you could fly Ryanair to Dublin, because that's where they're based. Nowhere else in the EU is where Ryanair currently flies, which would cause travel chaos. It would cause trade chaos. Again, there's lots of bad things about that no deal suddenly flipping on that.
To be clear on that, it's the right there is not your personal right with your passport, because you might need to get a visa suddenly, but you could still go somewhere on your passport. It's the deals the airlines themselves have that would be suspended. Yeah.
The other thing that's come up, and you may have heard about this in passing, but have you heard of Euratom?
Yeah, that's the nuclear power, European nuclear power, whatever. I can't remember the exact term for it, but yes.
Essentially, we would lose access to the safety procedures that they have for running nuclear power stations. It's like a collaborative effort at the moment, and we would lose our rights to that, which could have the impact of knocking onto our own nuclear power facilities, which means we would have to find new energy sources to keep lights on in the UK, and we'd have to do that quite quickly. I think we also import some of our energy from France, don't we? We've got deals with...
Yes, we do. We there's basically a big line, basically where the Channel Tunnel is, I think, that allows us to use power from over there.
So that deal would gone. So you might be, not only might food prices go up and you can't go on your holiday anymore, you can't escape the country, you also might have to ration electricity in the short term, because we can't access electricity very well, and we'd have to limit that. And the final point is that it ties into sort of the legal chaos, but it would affect EU citizens' rights who are living in the country. They'd still be able to live here, but again, what exactly their rights would be really uncertain.
Yeah.
Could they still access the NHS? Can they still access certain other services, benefits, etc. if they're not full UK citizens? What paperwork do they have to prove that they're here? We've already talked on this podcast about sort of Windrush and the problems that people had when they couldn't find their documents. If there was suddenly a day where suddenly all the EU citizens had to provide documents or something to that effect, it would be big chaos again for a large proportion of the UK's country.
I mean, how many people have their birth certificate kept at their parents' house or something like that?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah,
it's a logistical challenge at the very least. Even if assuming you have nowhere everything is.
So, not to put too much of a downer on it, but that's what a no deal looks like, at least in the short term. So when people are saying, "Oh, a no deal will be better than a bad deal," that's sort of bad for us in the long term, I think certainly in the short term it would upset loads of businesses as they can't trade. Citizens, the impact on citizens, I think, is clear in terms of food and energy and whirights. Would be put into chaos, and I think for whoever the governments, I think whichever government is in charge at that time would be a PR disaster. I think they'd certainly lose the next election. So ultimately, I think the threat of the UK of a no deal is a little empty. The EU might suffer some effects from not getting a good deal with the UK from leaving, but the EU will still be able to function as it does largely because it will be amongst 26 other countries. The UK, if it's just out there on its own and we haven't made contingencies for a no deal, then the effect might be catastrophic. I think it was the main story on the BBC News page today that the NHS was starting to make contingencies for a no deal, how it affects services. Even if we make contingencies, it wouldn't look good in any way, shape or form for the government who's in charge on March 29th if we suddenly left the EU without a deal.
Yeah, no, I mean, we already think it's unlikely that the government, whichever government, I assume we're not going to have a general election before then, fingers crossed. But, the government in power with Brexit is going to look bad. I don't see a way they can get out of it, right? They can't please everyone. And this is a thing we've said about Brexit all along, that people who don't want it are going to be annoyed about it. People who did want it all have different ideas of what it is, because no one said this is exactly what a Brexit is.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be easy to do it without alienating a whole load of people. So whoever's in charge dealing with Brexit will suffer the consequences. I mean, and I think haven't we said before, we think that's probably why Theresa May has not lost her job, because everyone is aware that whoever is Prime Minister will basically not be Prime Minister very quickly short thereafter. So there's no point in challenging her until she's kind of done that. They're happy to let her take the fall, but it's a long game for them.
Yeah, she certainly, after her performance in the last general election, I think they're fine offering her up as a sacrificial lamb. Almost, you wouldn't, if you felt that you had somebody charismatic and who was ready to take the state for, you wouldn't let them do it at this moment where they could suddenly have their reputation ruined so quickly by what happens in Brexit. It's better to have somebody who's already been in charge and already had some tests in the face of Theresa May, and let her take the blame rather than risk your trump card at this point.
For those of you listening to this podcast on an Android device, please do us a favor and give the Podcast Republic app a try. If you've been listening on the website up until now, this app will allow you to get all of your favorite podcasts directly on your Android device. And of course, you can then search for podcasts you want to listen to, select them as a favorite, and have them all just one click away. I've said this before, but one of the things I really like about this app is that you can modify the podcast details locally, so you can customize the look of the feed on your device, rename episodes, allow you to reorganize things a bit better. And also, don't forget, while you're there, to set unparliamentary language as a favorite, so you don't miss any new episodes from the front benches on the Podcast Republic app. And now, straight on into our quick polls update.
So this week, latest polls we've got for ICM and Salvation, it's still got the Conservatives ahead by 3 points. The ICM one has the Conservatives down 1. So yeah, it's much the same trend as we've had in the past few weeks. Unfortunately, there was a lot going on before where Labour and Conservatives were sort of battling it out, or at least Labour ahead. But it seems there's a consistent trend now where Labour are behind the Conservatives again. But the Conservatives have lost a little bit of their lead. I think we mentioned that they were 5 points up in some polls. There was a
+7 in June.
Yeah, YouGov one +7 seems to be a bit of an outlier there. It's sort of returned to normality, or at least what we were seeing before then, with the Conservatives still being ahead. The thing that the Conservatives have on the horizon that we haven't touched on today is, we've talked about the customs union before. Yeah. They've got another big meeting at Chequers this weekend, and there's a vote that's going to happen mid-July where the government puts forward its customs proposal, which is a customs proposal they can then take to the EU and sort out there. If that caused a major split in the Conservative Party, or the government doesn't win that vote, I think faith within the Conservative Party it would put the Brexit negotiations back quite a few months, because they have to go back and renegotiate those customs. I think it would shake people's faith in the government to govern and to negotiate Brexit, and you would see quite a sharp fall in the polls if that happened. But at the moment, they are keeping relatively steady.
I think as well, this is our 10th episode, which I think it's a little bit of a milestone. That's not nice to see. We've been managing to do this for 20 weeks now. I've never really been I've not really tracked polls before. I've always looked back when there's an election, and they'll, the BBC will put together the nice graph where they take all these polls at every point and they kind of average them, so you can see the average of the polls. And I look at that, but it is very interesting looking from week to week, every 2 weeks, and seeing where the trends are. As you say, it's not been particularly interesting since the local elections, but it is, I feel checking this website definitely helps me stay more informed, and I hope it's helping our listeners as well if they weren't aware of it before. So I think this is it's really nice to say, I mean, who knows how good our predictions will be going forward, but it is a nice thing to have a chat about each week, and I definitely think it helps me get an understanding of how public opinion is shaped, because when you see all these papers being most papers have an agenda, right? So well all papers have an agenda, but
some more than others.
Yeah, some more than others. So you see that can sometimes make you worry about how the country's going, or what things are going on. And whereas if you look at these polls and they're staying quite steady, you go, well, actually, people aren't as swayed as much as I was worried they would be by this kind of some of the more vitriolic stuff you see in the papers.
I was just going to add to that the only, if you had to look at the graph that we put in our show notes that show the polls, the only massive change in the polls was in the general election last year, where Labour went from 25.9% to 44.9% after the general election. So I think that made me realize how much the general public tends to pay attention to politics in the mainstream, that they really switch on at election times, and that's where you've got the biggest opportunity to affect public opinion, when you're in a slower news cycle or in the middle of a government, or as we are now. It seems that this government is set and that there's not going to be a big election anytime soon. Public opinion, despite the volatility of the newspapers, does tend to remain fairly consistent.
Yeah, I mean, if you scroll back to the bottom here, which is this time last year, as we've been saying, it's conservative, but the amount of positive is between like +1 and +7 at the most extreme recently. You look back and it's conservative Labour, conservative Labour, conservative Labour, tie, is June through September last year. So you can see, as you say, it was a very different landscape, but it was always very close. They've been hovering around this kind of 40%. And I mean, as we've noted before, UKIP was then about 8 to 10%, and now they've dropped to 3%. So a lot of those people have gone back to the Conservatives.
Yeah, or simply not interested anymore. Like sometimes, if you take somebody out of politics, then they can't go down as an I don't know in the poll, and it doesn't affect.
Yeah, and so for this week's regular feature, well, I don't think we have anything, do we? You've written down a few questions, but they're not as much of a deep dive really as we've done before, or necessarily something as silly. So what questions have you got for me this week?
The only one I've got is on July 24th this year. That's when Parliament breaks up for summer. So that's when we're going to move into our sort of call out for, our sort of deep dive episodes into certain things that affect British politics or US politics, or whatever you want to find out there. So I want to do a quick shout out in this feature just to say that we'll be looking for some of the types of questions that I've used in this regular feature before. I want to do a deeper dive and get some statistics and put forward a proper case for changing the voting system or abolishing the House of Lords or whatever. So I want listeners' suggestions. Is there anything that they found that they don't understand about politics or would want to know a little more about, or one big debate they'd like to see us have or organise at both sides of the argument for? So it's going to use that here. But my question for you this week is that as they're breaking up for summer, where do you suggest Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn and Vince Cable go on their holidays this year? And what should they do what's the best course of action for them to relax? What do you see them doing?
So is this a question of what do I think they'll do, or is this a question of what I think they should do?
What you think they should do. Let's take it in. I don't mind if you want to take it into the realms of fantasy a little.
Okay. So, right, Theresa May, she's definitely been very stressed, I would imagine, in her role. I mean, being Prime Minister is stressful in of itself. With all the Brexit stuff added in, I can't imagine it's a happy job right now. Mm-hmm. Party falling around about her and stuff like that. So I think she and Mr. May probably need to go off. We know she likes her, was it leather skirt she had, and she likes some nice shoe brands. So without wanting to be stereotypical, she clearly likes her fashion. So I think she should maybe go to somewhere like Milan. Maybe, I don't know when the Milan fashion show is, but something like that seems like it'd be kind of up her street. Kind of put the phone away and I mean, she has aides, right? So she can have an aide come to her if there's a massive emergency. Put that phone down, get away from it all, and really kind of relax. I think. I mean, we need her to be in the top position, regardless of what you feel about Theresa May. Being a little serious for a moment, we want her to be as refreshed as possible for those Brexit negotiations, so so we don't end up with no deal. So, I think Italy sounds nice. Maybe
so she can do some negotiations on the side there if needed.
Oh yeah, I mean we know quite a few MPs have done that in the last few years, flying somewhere on holiday and then accidentally, talking to the Saudis about weapons or something. Yes.
It just comes up in conversation.
You know how it is. You're there with a Saudi prince and he offers you a load of money and you go, oh, well, I couldn't possibly, but here's some nukes. Well, not that that's ever happened, but you know what I mean. Corbyn, I mean, I don't know much about Corbyn's habits besides the fact he likes to make jam and go down to his allotment. So I think maybe he needs to get a good friend in who can look after the allotment for him, someone he trusts. So maybe he should go go on a proper walking holiday up north. Go and get away from it all as well. I think everyone should go on holiday and get away from it all for a bit. So maybe he should go up and do some hiking up north, maybe up in Scotland. I feel like that would be kind of right up his street.
So revitalise Scottish Labour whilst he's up there.
Yeah. Go whip them into shape. Show them how to make some decent jam. I don't know if there are any stereotypes about Scottish jam.
No, it just
at all. But he can go up there and show them how to make his jam.
That sounds chill. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and knowing him, he might accidentally throw a festival at the end of it. Just get everyone together, him up on stage, a few people throwing a sign at him talking about Brexit. But as long as he tries to, again, I think avoiding Brexit is key. And then on to Vince Cable. I mean, I think he's probably in the easiest position here. Is basically his job at the moment is to be that detractor in Parliament, because the Lib Dems have put themselves up as the pro-EU party, and the other two parties have to worry about Brexit and keeping everyone happy. So all he has to do really is just be like, we love the EU, and the people voting for the Lib Dems will just be like, yeah, that's us. I think his job has been a lot easier. So maybe he should, I don't know, do something different. He doesn't necessarily need to unwind. Maybe he should go on a jet skiing holiday, just because I'd love to see those photos. Like, what is the one thing you don't think Vince Cable is likely to do? Probably jet skiing, paragliding, something like that. I'd just love to see a load of photos of him looking very, very happy doing some extreme sports.
I imagine him on the jet ski, shirtless, but still with his hat on, his big brimmed hat, smiling away. Okay, I think we should leave listeners with that image in their head.
Yeah. Vince Cable living out his secret fantasy of being in a Bond movie. Like in a wetsuit, but then like when he parks it up at the end of the day, he just unzips and he's in the tux and he goes and has a few cocktails. I think he'd love that.
Yeah, sounds perfect.
So we're getting to the end of the episode. As usual, you can find us at all the places that you have before. So you can find our website at parliamentary.observer. You can find us on Facebook on Parliamentary Language. You can find us on Twitter at unparlpodcast. You can find us on Reddit, which is /r/unparliamentary. As Rob mentioned, we're about to hit silly season. We've got, so it's the 1st of July. That means we probably have at most 2 episodes left, because 24th of July Parliament breaks up for the summer. So we'll probably try and do like a wrap up just before they go away. But we might move to doing monthly. We don't know exactly yet, because it's our first time. But the idea is we're going to have like a season of specials over the summer. We'll probably stick to 2 weeks, just because if we go monthly, there'll only be 2. But yeah, these will be kind of a bit more in depth. Maybe trying to mix up between what we know as well, because while I don't know as much about politics as Rob, I have some interest in other areas, like we're talking about stats in the media and things like that. So if you have any suggestions, get on the website, give us some comments, write on the Facebook page, tell us on Twitter. I will put up a poll, I think, on Facebook, so that people can, what something they want a 101 for, or anything else they want us to discuss kind of in depth while there's not really any politics going on. I think we'll just ignore the headlines for those 2 months. Like, we just won't talk about them unless like something apocalyptic happens. Does that sound okay?
That sounds okay, yeah. And I, for one, hope that nothing apocalyptic happens. So, I
mean, yes, I think nothing apocalyptic happening would be great. Can we just have a nice summer, and can England get a bit cooler, please? Yeah, excellent. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, other than the fact if England wins the World Cup, I will have to devote at least 20 minutes of a podcast. I apologise in advance.
We can do that as like a bonus episode. The Rob's England wins the World Cup rundown.
It will have massive political implications. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Excellent. So I suppose it's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from him. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.